was Thanksgiving morning, 2016. A driver on Interstate 5 in rural California spotted a woman on the side of the road. She was bound, emaciated, branded on her shoulder. She weighed 87 pounds. Her name was Sherri Papini, and 3 weeks earlier, she had vanished without a trace while jogging near her home in Redding, California. The nation exhaled. The missing mother was home. Her husband was waiting. Her 2 children were waiting. The FBI had spent 22 days and an enormous amount of public resources searching for her kidnappers, 2 Hispanic women in a dark SUV, armed with a handgun. There was just one problem. Those women didn't exist. On November 2, 2016, Keith Papini came home from work and found the house empty. His wife Sherri had gone out for a jog. Her phone and keys were left at the spot where she ran. Her earbuds were on the ground. Shasta County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate search. Within days, the FBI joined. Detectives authored close to 20 search warrants, covering Michigan, Southern California, multiple states. They were looking for a kidnapper. The community rallied around Keith and their 2 young children. Donations poured in. National media covered the case. People magazine put Sherri's face on the front cover. Then, 22 days after she disappeared, she was back. Found on Thanksgiving Day on a rural road, 150 miles south of Redding. Bound at the wrists. A chain around her waist. Hair chopped off. A brand on her right shoulder. The word Exodus burned into her skin. She told investigators she had been taken at gunpoint by 2 Hispanic women. She said she was kept in an undisclosed location. She said she barely escaped with her life. Everyone believed her. Or almost everyone. Because the first time a medical examiner looked at her injuries, something didn't sit right. The wounds were consistent with deliberate, controlled injuries, not prolonged captivity or forced abuse. The bite marks on her body turned out to be rashes. And then there was the DNA. When investigators collected evidence from Sherri Papini after her return, they found something they weren't expecting. Male DNA on her clothing. They ran it through CODIS, the National DNA Database. No match. They ran it through familial DNA analysis, a technique that looks for close genetic relatives of the unknown contributor. That process takes time. Years, in some cases. So investigators waited. And while they waited, Sherri Papini continued to collect victim assistance payments from the California Victim Compensation Board. Between 2017 and 2021, she received more than 35 payments totaling over $30,000 for therapy, for ambulance costs, for the trauma of a kidnapping that didn't happen. Meanwhile, her story kept shifting in small ways. Details that didn't add up. Inconsistencies between interviews. And then, in 2020, the familial DNA match came back. The male DNA found on Sherri Papini's clothing belonged to a man named James Reyes. James Reyes was her ex-boyfriend. They had known each other since they were 13 years old. They had previously been engaged. When investigators confronted Reyes with the DNA, he didn't deny it. He told them what happened. He and Sherri had been secretly communicating for months before she disappeared, using prepaid burner phones so Keith wouldn't find out. Historical cell site records confirmed it. Reyes had traveled from Southern California to Redding on or around November 2, 2016, the same day Sherri vanished. Sherri hadn't been kidnapped. She had called him. She had asked him to come get her. According to Reyes, Sherri told him Keith was beating and raping her, and she needed to escape. He believed her. He drove to Redding. She got in his car voluntarily. For 22 days, she stayed with him at his apartment in Costa Mesa, Orange County, 150 miles south of Redding. While her husband and the FBI were running a multi-state manhunt, she was there, with him. When she decided she missed her children and wanted to go home, Reyes drove her to Interstate 5 and dropped her off. But she couldn't go home as Sherri Papini, who had run away. She had to go home as a victim. So before Reyes dropped her off, she made herself look like one. She asked him to hit her. He refused. Instead, he held a hockey stick for her to run into. She branded herself on the shoulder. She arrived at the roadside bound and emaciated because she had chosen not to eat. The word on her shoulder, Exodus. When investigators asked her what it meant, she said it looked like a verse from the book of Exodus. She had burned it into her own skin. Reyes took a law enforcement polygraph. He passed. On August 13, 2020, nearly 4 years after she disappeared, an FBI special agent and a detective from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office sat down with Sherri Papini. Her husband Keith was in the room. At the outset of the meeting, investigators told her clearly, "It is a crime to lie to federal agents." Sherri Papini said she understood, and then she continued to claim she had been kidnapped. Investigators gave her a choice. They could reveal what they knew right now, in front of Keith, or he could step out. Sherri and Keith whispered to each other while the detectives waited outside. She told him she wanted him to stay, that she only felt safe with him in the room. What she didn't say was that the detectives were about to dismantle her entire story with DNA evidence, with phone records, with car rental receipts, with the testimony of her ex-boyfriend, who had already told investigators everything. The detective laid it out. The DNA that was on you belongs to James Reyes. The DNA alone says it's him. And when we talked to him, confronted him with the DNA, he told us what happened. Sherri's response, "No. There's no way it's James. There's just no way." The detective, "DNA doesn't lie. He came and got you because you asked him to." The detective continued, "The car rental, the fuel, the mileage, the calls from you to him, the burner phone, all that can be proven." On camera, Sherri bent over, face in her hands. She said quietly, "I'm horrible," but she did not admit to any criminal wrongdoing. She had been warned twice that lying to federal agents was a crime. She had been shown the DNA evidence. She had heard the detective tell her that Reyes had passed a polygraph. She had been told they had the burner phones, the call records, the car rental, the cell tower data. And she still didn't tell the truth. Then she said something that revealed more than she intended. Talking to the investigator, she whispered about her alleged captor. "I don't want them to find her. I don't want her to be arrested. I don't want to press charges." She didn't want her kidnappers caught, because there were no kidnappers to catch. On March 3, 2022, more than 5 years after she vanished from that jogging trail, Sherri Papini was arrested by the FBI. She was charged with 1 count of making false statements to federal agents and 34 counts of mail fraud for the victim assistance payments she had fraudulently received. 6 weeks later, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts. The rest were dropped as part of a plea deal. On April 20, 2022, 2 days after she pleaded guilty, her husband Keith filed for divorce and sought emergency custody of their 2 children. In his statement, he said, "I am asking that the court help me protect my children from the negative impact of their mother's notoriety." On September 19, 2022, Judge William Shub sentenced Sherri Papini to 18 months in federal prison, more than double what prosecutors had requested. He also ordered her to pay $309,902 in restitution to the California Victim Compensation Board, the Social Security Administration, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI. Before sentencing, Sherri addressed the court. "I am guilty, Your Honor. I am guilty of lying. I am guilty of dishonor. What is done cannot be undone. It cannot be erased." But both the judge and the assistant U.S. attorney said her comments were simply more manipulation. She served 11 months before being released to a halfway house in August 2023. Here is what the evidence showed. In the end, Sherri Papini had planned this for months. She and her ex-boyfriend had been communicating on burner phones since at least December 2015, nearly a year before she disappeared. She had fabricated a story about 2 Hispanic women kidnappers and sent descriptions to an FBI sketch artist. She had sent text messages to FBI agents describing the instruments her non-existent captors used to hurt her. She had self-inflicted her own injuries to support that story. And then, when investigators sat across from her with DNA evidence, phone records, car rental receipts, and the testimony of the man she had been with, she still didn't tell the truth. That is what investigators call a tell. Not the breakdown. Not the face and the hands. not the "I'm horrible." The tell was the moment she said she didn't want her kidnappers found. Nobody who survived what she claimed to have survived says that. Sherri Papini knew exactly where those women were, because they had never existed in the first place.